The culture I was raised amongst was a military culture, and I have been labelled as military brats, millie kids, etc. However, my favourite is PadBratt. PadBratt refers to a child raised with military parents in current service. Pad refers to military accommodation and housing, and a brat is another name for a bastard, someone without a father. I have lived in 7 different houses, 4 different locations in 2 different countries, and have attended 6 different schools. I have had to say goodbye to my father on different occasions without any certainty that I would see him again, not being carried by sex. The upcoming clip from BuzzFeed's YouTube channel perfectly describes how difficult the question of military kids' origins can be.
Were you born again?
I was born in Guam, but I only lived there for like 3 months, so it doesn't really count. I mean, then I moved to Germany, so then I moved to Washington State, and Washington D.C.
I was born in Salisbury. This is where my story begins. Shortly after my family and I were posted to Germany, where we lived in a small town called Mönchengladbach. I spent a year living on what we would call Civvy Street, with a difficult start adapting to the country's new culture of a new language, unfamiliar brands and new local customs such as their profound recycling and rubbish collection laws. My mother and I acted out the animals we required for our Sunday roast to our local butchers, as we did not know the German word, for example, chicken, which then followed a confusing 20 minutes of my mother clucking and pointing to her breasts to the poor German butcher. However, after World War II and the new presence of England and America in Germany, it caused cultural diffusion, and thus the Western idea of supermarkets and commercialism was more evident. After living in Mönchengladbach for about 3 years, our family's dialect has adapted to consisting of multiple German phrases that we still use today. We next moved on to JHQ Rheindahlen, a local military camp that housed the British and German, American, Dutch and Italian armies. Our most favourable aspects of the camp was the ability to be part of communities who were in similar situations with family members in active service. At the ages of 4 and 5 when I lived in Germany, I did not have a strong idea of what was going on with my family. All I knew was that my dad, every couple of weeks or months, would fly away for several months and come back with more cheap knockoff electronic goods from his travels. It was only when I turned 5 did I learn what hell he was enduring on those travels. After leaving Germany, we moved to a military base called Chicksands, and that was where I would call home for the next 7 to 8 years, and for the bulk of my childhood. Here I learnt many new morals and social etiquettes, such as non-verbal kinetic adapters, like saluting, providing a firm handshake when meeting someone new. I learnt most of these ideas from being around high-ranked soldiers, for example calling everyone sir and ma'am. This has formed my identity that I hold today by these subculture norms and values, and I am more polite and formal when addressing someone who clearly demands respect. My value for other people's positions of power has also adapted due to this culture I grew up in, and the semiotics of respecting people in the subculture of the military has made me respond to the cultural products of the military rank system even more so, for example understanding the symbolic meaning of ribbons and stripes. As a child, I developed different relationships with friends than most would when living on Civvy Street. For example, as I grew older, it became harder to form such strong friendships with the people around me, as a little voice in the back of my head kept telling me that soon enough they were just going to move away, and I would most likely never see them again. And this was the bitter truth with most of my friends from my younger years. They'd come and go, which wasn't great, but it was something we dealt with, much like how our parents did when they would lose friends in the army. Because of this expiration date we had in these friendships, I've become ferociously independent and found it hard to open up to fellow peers and form friendships, in a relaxed fear that they won't last long anyway. This in turn makes me quite protective of my identity and who I really am. Thus, in terms of Roger's concentric circles, I keep my inner private self completely private. I have a lot of memories of my dad coming home from service, and even more memories of him leaving. Sadly, it's those memories that stick in my mind more. My father worked with the military intelligence regiment and was commonly first response in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, Sierra Leone, Kosovo and Northern Ireland. One particular event was when my dad had just returned back from Iraq, and on the night of my sister's big 18th party, he got a phone call around 11 PM saying that they needed him right away back in Iraq. He quietly told my mother that he had to go and he wasn't sure when he would be back, and then he was gone. My mother did not wish to disrupt the party and so didn't share the news, meaning in the morning after, I distinctly remember coming downstairs to my mother and my sisters in floods of tears to discover Dad was gone, again. We didn't see or hear from him for about 4 months after that. Because of a specific line of work, he didn't have the opportunity to call home, so most of the time we just hoped for the best. Personally, I believe kids growing up on Civvy Street really have no clue what it's like being a child of an active serving military parent. As a child on Civvy Street may worry about coming home to seeing their parents upset over a bad grade they received from school, a military brat has the fear of coming home to a parent crying over an open letter saying their husband had died in service. As a PadBratt in the army, I grew up with both the American and German army spawns in Germany, and also with Muslims and Australians in Chicksands, England, meaning that my awareness of world culture as a whole is far more extensive than most people living outside of my culture. Because of this, my culture has levelled and their cultures have merged with mine, and mine with theirs, making our cultures more alike. For example, in Rheindahlem, when I was growing up with Americans, we had a cinema on camp that showed films from each of our countries, and when I would see Americans saluting to the national anthem at the beginning of every single film, I used to be confused. However, when I was in the United States earlier this year and the anthem played while I was in the cinema, I had the urge to stand and salute. This cultural practice I had learnt as a child had stayed with me. Growing up without a dad for a large portion of my childhood and being brought up by 3 women, meaning a lot of things differed between my life and people on Civvy Street. I didn't see the inside of a male changing room or toilet till I was about 10. Being the large male presence in my house, I took the role of the parent role in caring for my sister's well-being, and my fashion was also a little jumbled up and formed by my mother and sisters to their liking, which changed when we left the army in 2011 and my father was around more. His characteristics had an influence on how I dressed and sparked a great deal of rebellion in my teenage years. In regards of Cooley's looking glass theory, my father and the men in the army that I grew up in my culture and the society around me, viewed me as someone who should follow in their footsteps by dressing like them, behaving like them, and wearing my hair like them. Before my dad was around more after leaving the army, I was a lot more docile in my appearance, but once these expectations of me were apparent, I changed completely to live up to them. All the way through my secondary school years, for example, I wore Doc Martens polished and scuffed to perfection, which caused a lot of detentions and meetings with my parents. My father agreed with all of my arguments against my teachers, demonstrating that his influences affected the way I dressed massively, as it revealed that he was just like me when he was in school. When I turned 16, I shaved my head to a number 1 and continued my fashion of sporting the skinhead look. Big green Doc Martens with yellow laces, skinny acid wash blue jeans, white t-shirts and red braces, a fashion almost unique to my dad in the 70s and 80s when he first joined the army, and also the young squaddies I grew up around, young regular soldiers. I have my hair like this because I want to be close to what I grew up with, and also in order to sport the look I will have in 2021 when I myself have joined the army. The haircut certainly emphasises my personality as a military-oriented teen of being focused, determined and tied to routine. This is an example of Argyll's theory of self-representation of one's personality. When asked about his time with the forces, he always replies that the good moments definitely outweighed the bad, and he wouldn't trade his life in the army for the world. My father retired from the British Army after 27 years of service in 2011, and now suffers from severe post-traumatic stress disorder as a result from his vigorous service. My mother and I support him when he has breakdowns and care for him in the night when he encounters night terrors and wanders the house like a lost ghost. By hearing my dad discuss what he sees when he sleeps and hearing about his horrific experiences he had during his tours in the army, it affects my sleep negatively as those images are shown in my dreams. This is called integrational transmissions of trauma. Social scientists Ankarov and Monroe said that there are several variations of this transmission. In relation to PTSD, they said, over-disclosure can be just as problematic. When children are exposed to graphic details about their parents' traumatic experiences, they can start to experience their own set of PTSD symptoms in response to the images generated. I am fully aware that my presentation here has certainly made my life as a PadBratt seem full of depressive moments, but I can assure you, I had the greatest childhood anyone could have, and I simply would not trade it for the world. I am inspired to continue my involvement in the military lifestyle and subculture, and plan to raise my own children as PadBratts, whilst I serve in the army. Being in the military culture has formed my offstage identity to be independent and resilient to trauma, while my onstage identity has been looking the role of someone in the army, to prepare for my future identity. Much like how, although my father's war efforts have led to his PTSD after leaving, he had the greatest moments of his life whilst being in the service, and those memories definitely overthrow the worst. His and our family's stories and memories that we have accumulated in our time in the culture of the military will live with us forever, and we will always cherish the friendships and moments we've made in our time. Thank you for listening.